Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Guglielmo. I'm a clinician scientist here at Nemours, and I'm going to go through some slides pretty quickly just to kind of tell you how I got from there to here, thinking about 4 keys to becoming a clinician scientist. And really, I hope to leave time for questions at the end, plenty of time for questions at the end. And if you're not able to see the slides or if you're not able to hear me, please speak up from wherever you may be, not here in the room. Okay. So my goal is to introduce myself, tell you about the journey that I've taken for research, a slide or two about finding balance, some things to know and things I wish I'd known, take your questions, but overall I'd like my talk to be interesting to people. So I'll do my best. So that's me. So I grew up here in Delaware. I went to Brown and did a biochemistry Bachelor of Science. And one of those summers, I actually worked here in Nemours as a summer intern in a lab that still exists, actually, and that will come back, you'll see, toward the end. After graduating, I went to Jefferson, which is now Sidney Kimmel Medical College. I did the 7-year combined MD-PhD program, and I worked in a lab, again, that you'll hear more about later, that was looking at signal transduction in the intestinal epithelium, specifically an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase C, which is a cyclic GMP producing transmembrane receptor. I did my residency in pediatrics here at Nemours, Jefferson, and after graduation, I went into private practice, really doing primary care. And at some point, I realized I wanted to have more access to an academic pediatric way of thinking and practicing, and also to be able to do some research. So I came to the Department of Pediatrics here at Nemours in 2011. I was hired as an access pediatrician, which is a role that was created not just for me, but a role in a couple of different divisions. It was created to allow general pediatricians to see low complexity patients that were in various divisions. So GI, behavioral health, developmental medicine, dermatology. And in that job, I now am involved in a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease clinic. I've done some telemedicine, and I do a joint clinic with behavioral health, as well as just seeing kids with common GI problems. I also do an access genetics clinic once a week, and I still do a little bit of general pediatrics with our peds residents. I was able to get an academic appointment shortly after joining the division, and then this past year, an appointment here in biomedical research. So, starting as a clinician, how did I get myself involved in research? These are the 4 things: serendipity, mentoring, teamwork, and support. And so hopefully you'll see how they all played into this journey as I go through what's happened. So before I even came here, Nemours decided they wanted to improve access as part of their strategic plan. And that led to the creation of these access pediatrician roles, which piqued my interest and allowed me to come back to Nemours, where I had done my training. And so if that hadn't happened, I would probably not have come back to Nemours in this capacity. It also was a very new model, and very early on, our division chief in general peds said, you should be collecting data on this model of care, you should be thinking about approval, you should be thinking of doing research about this. And actually that led to some manuscripts and other research presentations from the get-go, which was sort of not what I was expecting. I expected it might take some time to sort of figure out where I could do some research. And in that process, there was a conference call about writing a brief for Capitol Hill about this new method of delivering healthcare. And one of the folks on the call said, have you heard anything about these MRDAs in the CTR, these Mentor Research Development Awards, part of the Center for Translational Research? And I said, no, what are you talking about? And so I learned in 2011 and early 2012 about what was going on in the CTR, and this person actually became my mentor on an MRDA that I was able to secure after that. But I didn't really know anything about it when I came back. And so it was somewhat serendipitous and some good mentoring there. At the same time, I networked with someone I had gone to medical school with who worked at Christiana Care. We talked about this Access Pediatrician model, and he asked me if I knew anything about the Delaware Health Science Alliance. Of course, being somewhat naive as well, I did not. And I actually applied for a small pilot grant from them right in the first 6 months of being here. It wasn't awarded, but it was a great experience sort of learning, okay, this is something that I might be able to do to try to help get some funding to look at this clinical research aspect. But of course, working towards that and the MRDA, I learned more about the Delaware CTR, and shortly after learning about it, I realized that they were going to begin soliciting proposals for pilot grants. So I had that on my mind, and I was trying to take advantage of different lectures from the MedCorps and the Investigator Network on navigating the NIH and writing grants, things that I had not really had much exposure to in my PhD lab, certainly not in residency or my primary care practice. So I was just trying to learn more and more about things. But again, at that time, the focus of my research was on healthcare delivery and practice transformation. And some of that initial data that I started taking from day one turned into a publication in pediatrics, which was very exciting. So when did it go from more clinical research to translational research, which is what I'm doing more of now? Again, some serendipity. My former PhD advisor was a guest speaker here at Nemours as part of ongoing research seminars, which I would not have been as aware of prior to getting involved with the CTR and learning about research here at Nemours. And he started talking about the same hormone and receptor system that I had studied in his lab during my training. And there was some novel role for this in appetite regulation and obesity, which had been recently discovered by their lab in mice and extrapolated to adults. So I met with him and said, I've had these thoughts about obesity and GI issues and appetite in my pediatric primary care patients and my GI patients. There must be some overlap here, and it led to some clinical and research questions, and we started talking about getting funding to develop, a research plan for these questions. And again, this was when I was learning about the pilot projects. Actually applied for a year one pilot before the MRDA that I did for the clinical research project. And it was a great experience sort of trying to figure out what's the role of this hormone and receptor system in obesity and constipation. I wasn't awarded a pilot grant that year, but I got some excellent review and feedback that helped in the future, which we'll go over in a bit. So I kind of went back to continuing the clinical research work. We did the MRDA. That was successful. It led to another publication, which is hopefully going to be coming out very soon, already submitted and reviewed. And then during the MRDA, we started talking, my mentor and I, about, well, what's next? And I mentioned that I had really had this passion the year before about this translational project, looking at obesity, constipation, and these hormones that I had studied back in graduate school. And she said, well, let's look at the review you got from your pilot application. Maybe you need to change it and reapply. So long story short, we were able to do that. I took her advice. I took my prior PhD advisor's advice. We restructured the grant and reapplied in year two for a pilot with a new mentor, which I got through the MedCorps, actually Dr. Duncan. And they were great at helping me get this application where it needed to be. And then I was awarded the year two pilot grant, looking specifically at obesity and this hormone receptor system, guanylyl cyclase C, and their overlap. So, as many of you probably are aware, there are ups and downs when it comes to research. So my mentor left the University of Delaware within a month of the pilot award beginning. So I was without a mentor after just a month of the grant funding. And I had to scramble to find a new mentor. And thankfully, MedCorps and Dr. Akins were able to help me find someone who had an interest in the same kind of work and worked at one of the 4 institutions. And that was great. There was also a lot of difficulty in the beginning about finding a research coordinator because a variety of things that just led to it being a bit of a challenge to get somebody to help with the nitty-gritty of the project. And again, talking to one of my other mentors about, who they knew. We found somebody who was perfect for the job and really, bar none, was critical to the project being successful. A colleague of mine in the division had been interested all along in joining the project, and he took a more substantial role. My coordinator that we finally secured was very motivated, and I had the advantage of a basic science lab here at the hospital that supports the gastro division where I was working, and they were very eager to participate in some of the biochemical parts of the pilot grant. So, obviously some of these things had to be set up before the grant was submitted, but again, coming back to everybody and really making sure the rubber hit the road and getting things done, it was really great, even after the initial blip of losing the primary mentor, that things seemed to work. So definitely some ups, definitely some downs. And now I had made a connection during my summer internship in Dr. Fananich and Dr. Hobson's lab here at Nemours with some people who were still here at Nemours some 20-some years later, and some of them working in the histology core lab. And part of the project that we proposed to the pilot project was immunohistochemistry, and I had some initial contact with them to get budgets and to get antibodies sort of set up, and they were also wonderfully supportive once we were funded and able to really help me take things and run with it for that part of the project. As a GI access pediatrician, I still attend rounds with the fellows and the attendings where we go over pathology cases, and so I got to know some of our pathologists a lot better, and that made it very easy to recruit one of the pathologists to help with staining scoring for these histochemistry projects, part of the grant. We also use day medicine very often in GI, and so I got to know the nurses there, and the two head nurses were really eager to help participate in the project for the blood draw patient recruiting part of the project. So folks just kind of came out of the woodwork and were very receptive to helping me take the grant proposal and actually put it into action. And that was great. And one other connection that I don't think I would have had without the CTR and the pilot project was getting to talk about my project even before we started having data, just to folks who were interested in research that was going on. And one of the folks in the audience said, "Hey, have you thought about getting a summer student through the Nemours summer program? They can really help with data collection, chart review." And I was like, "Oh, wonderful." I was trying to figure out how on earth I was going to do this chart review by myself. And I had a great summer student from the University of Delaware, and she did, over almost 11,000 charts. She was able to go through it as a great summer project. She came up with some great data that we were able to use for part of the pilot project. And I don't think I would have thought of that if I hadn't, had somebody suggest it to me while talking about my project in the early months. So pilot project's been successful. We were able to recruit all 24 participants that we were hoping to recruit, 12 in each group. We had a great control and sample group, as well as the other aim. The summer student got me all the samples that I needed. And through this project, I've developed some collaborations with some scientists at the University of Delaware, besides my primary mentor, who are working on appetite regulation from both a psychological standpoint, from the nutrition standpoint, not just the biochemical. And so I'm now starting to think about larger grant mechanisms and some bigger collaborations. I also was lucky enough to be able to talk about my work in the sort of middle stages of the project on a conference call that involved some folks at the NIH, and that was great. I will say that during the MRDA, because there was a lot of emphasis on the clinical research, the healthcare delivery stuff, we had a lot of meetings with folks at ARC and PCORI and ICHD, and so just getting that exposure and sort of getting your name out there and talking about your work and getting feedback really was invaluable, and never would have happened without CTR and other connections. And so as the pilot project was sort of coming to a close, talking about next steps with my research mentor and some other folks here at Biomedical Research, it led to a new collaboration with our biomolecular core for the next pilot project that we're going to do. And we were able to secure some funding through the Delaware INBRI for that. And that led to, the same person who had mentored me all those summers ago helped me connect with the Center for Applied Clinical Genomics here, because part of this additional pilot project is going to involve some genomics work. So it's really been kind of like coming home and finding folks willing to work with you, which has just been great. All right, so here's what's going on currently. I think I've kind of talked about this mostly. We're analyzing our data, we're writing 2 manuscripts, and we're preparing for some future grants, as well as some that have already been written and are out and submitted, and we're waiting to hear. Have this new small funding project to kind of look at the next step. I still do a little bit of the Access Pediatrician work, although it's not my primary research objective. There are some folks who are making it their primary objective, and I'm sort of helping supply them with data, but that'll help me, still kind of get published and be involved in that particular field. And through the last couple of years, I've been asked to help out in different smaller projects just in a peripheral way, and that really has been very eye-opening, just seeing all the different things going on here, both through the obesity cluster and the new CMMI grant proposal, as well as getting to advise and mentor some even more junior folks, like a GI fellow who did a research project on the access role a couple of years ago, and another GI fellow that's doing some survey research now. I'm on a scholarly oversight committee for an ER fellow. So these are things I never would have really been able to do in primary care, and have been able to sort of use my research hat, if you will, through CTR and some other great things going on here at the Moores. All right. Those are my girls. So I definitely bring work home. I don't know too many people who don't. But some days I have to leave on time, if you will, for picking up the kids or making dinner. My wife works. She's a professional. She actually works crazier, longer hours than I do. And when I get home, even if I have work to do, if the kids are still awake during the week, and if it's the weekends and they need something to do, I don't do any work when they're around. I do the work when they go to bed, or before they get up, or when they're at sports and I don't need to be the one taking them, so that when I'm home, they know I'm home. And I try to do that as much as I can. And when I'm out of the office, just in general, about half of that time, I make sure I devote to stuff I couldn't get done in the office, and the half is time for me, so that I don't go crazy. The other thing about balance is not just work-life balance or home and work balance, but research and clinical care balance. And so in my division, I have 2 days or really a day and a half of protected time. And the staff know that when there are messages that are not urgent, that they might go unanswered for most of the day or until the next day. And they talk to the families about that, and they sort of triage, all right, these he needs to get back to today, these he can wait till tomorrow. And if there's something urgent, although today was an exception, there are folks who are covering fellows or other attendings to handle those things. I think that that's really been an important factor in my success, is that I've actually had the time to do what I needed and wanted to do for research projects, whether it's meeting with mentors, traveling to University of Delaware, analyzing data with a statistician, and not having to think about or worry about the clinical things that are going on, on the front burner. It's very challenging, though, but it is something that's a work in progress. And I definitely take vacation because I need time to recharge my brain and to, think about other things I might want to do without taking my work with me. And I try really hard not to work on vacation. Usually successful at that. All right, so last couple of slides are just some tips and things I've learned over the years that might help others who are starting out. I really wish I had known about certain resources that were available from the get-go. I didn't really know about the core labs here at Nemours until someone along the way mentioned them to me, and I really didn't know or didn't learn for myself and seek out information about who are the PIs here at Nemours in biomedical research, and what are they doing, and who are the PIs in the clinical arm of the hospital who are doing research. I really heard about it from word of mouth, and I wish that I had either done more to find out about them, or that there was a way to find out about them from the get-go. And I think there is. It's just I didn't do as much for that. In the beginning, I really sort of was, particularly with the first grant application for the pilot, really did not seek out as much technical advice for laying out the project and the grant, and that might have been part of the reason why it it wasn't successful the first time around. Just a very specific thing about the project, we did some commercial antibodies that ended up not working on the pilot project and had to go back to the drawing board and get some custom antibodies made. And I don't know why it didn't dawn on me from the beginning that there are a lot of companies that will make custom antibodies. That might have saved some time. And there are other senior scientists who are in our institutions that are doing work like this, and it really would have been good to have reached out to them sooner rather than later. And so that's just sort of a tip for others. When I started, there wasn't as much of a mentoring database or things like Vivo that were ready for folks or fully, built. And so that would be something that, as they've come online, great for other investigators to think about. I think it would be really great if we had a particular physical unit where we knew there was a staff with sort of consistent funding and support or budgetary cost centers that any PI that wanted to do clinical trial or clinical investigations could use that unit rather than having to coordinate with folks in the hospital who are really primarily doing things for patients and not for research. And that would be something great that I've heard folks talk about, but I'm not sure it exists yet here. And then on the clinical side, it's one thing to have a research coordinator when you're in research primarily, but to find somebody on the clinical side proved to be a bit of a challenge for me. And maybe that was me, maybe that was just the nature of it. But if there were a bigger network, that would be great. So those are some things I wish I'd known more about, or I wish were available. Here's some things that worked well for me, which I think I've sort of touched on during the talk. Coming to the lectures by Dr. Duncan and others for the Med Corps, and really learning about grant writing and how to deal with the NIH and how to write a paper and how to write a manuscript and how to edit and things that I thought I knew, but could always learn more about. And making connections when presenting abstracts at annual meetings or conferences was really invaluable to me, as well as meetings that were held here at the hospital. Some of my mentors and advisors there that I was able to troubleshoot along the way with could not have made any of this happen without many of them. My division has been great, and my department and department chair have been great at supporting my protected time. I've also had some great support from some of my peers, and some of them have given these Junior Investigator Network talks, and it's been really great to sort of see how they've gotten to where they are and to get their tips and suggestions. And of course, family support's been really important too. Last couple things. I really wish I had a better concept of just how long things can take to get coordinated and get done. Not just for the nitty-gritty of chart reviews or recruiting patients, which can be really time-consuming, whether you're a research coordinator supported or not, but just getting things up off the ground. I mean, the grant money started in December. We didn't recruit any patients until May. We didn't finish until the following December, and I needed to get an extension so that I could make sure I could get everybody done. And then the antibody production, that took time. Everything takes time. So, and I don't think I had a concept of that, a good concept of that beforehand. Money, I think this goes without saying that funding is competitive, budgets are tight, and you need to keep at it, keep applying, and hopefully finding the money here, there, or everywhere to support your work. And protected time, I learned, is not just money to support my salary, but it really needs to be truly protected away from your other responsibilities so that you can devote it to research. And sometimes it's someone's prerogative to give you that protected time if it's not supported by grant funding. And I will say that trying to figure out percent effort and costs was really a challenge for me, even with the great help of our OSP here, Office of Sponsored Projects. Thank you. Just still kind of overestimating, underestimating. I'm not good at that. So I wish I had known that was going to be as much of a challenge as it was. And support. You really do need to have good support from the people above you and the people around you. There are definitely some clinicians that I work alongside who don't understand why I would want to do research or why I'm doing research or what it's for. And that's been a challenge, even at an academic place like Nemours. Balance is both a goal and a journey. So my ability to keep work life and research clinic balance has been a process, but it continues to be something I strive toward reaching. And I've definitely learned that I need to not turn down help when it's offered. and just try to do it myself because a lot of times I can't. When I send out emails, I don't expect that I'll get a response maybe 50% of the time, and so I plan on following up with that person by phone or showing up in their office and saying, hey, I need your help with this. And that has worked. And I've spent a lot more time presenting kind of like I am now on sort of long distance conference calls, which was never something I was doing before or even knew to be comfortable with, and I've had to get comfortable with it. I'm still not sure it works great for every situation, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And this was advice given to me early on, as I was presenting at a local meeting and then presenting at a national meeting about different things. They said, you really should save all your slides in sort of a slide deck because you can pull from them later and say, okay, I have a great background slide. I can recycle this for another talk, or I have a great results slide. As new results come in, I want to update the slide deck, and so then it's ready, because you might get asked to give a talk on a short notice about what you're doing, or the Excel might want to hear about what's going on in 2 weeks, and you're on the spot. So having some slides sort of pre-prepared as you're going helps with writing manuscripts, but it also helps with presentations. So that's something I've sort of forced myself to do. All right, so a lot of people to thank, both colleagues and mentors on the left, the research team, starting with Dalal and Steph, Christina, Maria, Bobby, Heather, Lacey, and Yan Ping, and then folks here in OSP and the CTR and my division have been really helpful at getting me where I am. And this is the funding support. And that's our new dog, which has also been a lot of fun. Okay, that's all I prepared. I would be happy to answer questions for the remaining 25 minutes or whatever people are interested in.
Well, I guess I could ask. Hi, I'm Kyoko from research department. Actually, I'm 100% research, but I always want to collaborate with the clinicians. Whatever the position they are valuable actually resources for us. If I want to identify participants, I need to see the really front person that the seeing the patient, and then sometimes we need to see the schedulers, and I might need the expert opinions in the future or to understand the results and so on and so forth. But it's very difficult. Again, this comes back to the time issue to even have a meeting, even though clinician side are interested in collaboration, but they have really limited time. Usually, lunchtime is the only time. And even lunchtime, they have a departmental meeting or some special meetings, and then it's all eat up the lunchtime and very limited time. And what would be the best way to secure time on these more, not really define the project, but even just the startup part? Is there any good way to get the contact and maintain the contact?
Sure. So just for everybody out there, in case you didn't hear, Kyoko's asking about what's a good way to try to begin contact and maintain contact with the clinical divisions or departments when you're interested in collaborating on research or getting the sort of frontline clinicians to help you with a project that you're interested in. I think it's a great question. I think it's going to be different for every department or division. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information that might help based on what I know has worked in the two divisions that I'm affiliated with, General Peds and GI. So Nemours is organized into departments, the largest being the Department of Pediatrics. But there's also surgery, radiology, orthopedics, pathology, and critical care anesthesiology. So I don't know as much about those departments, but in terms of the Department of Peds, which has multiple divisions, GI, genetics, endocrine, general peds, nephrology, etc., I would suggest that the first person you seek out for a particular division in that department would be the chairman or the chairperson of the division, chief of the division, and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, I'm interested in someone in your division that might have access to these kind of clinical samples. Do you know of any faculty that are interested? So you'll either get a response because they'll send it out to their faculty, or you won't. The next step might be, if you're targeting a particular division, seeing if that division has clinical fellows. Because all the clinical fellows have to do a research project, and they might be a way to kind of get an in with collaboration. Again, email first, and then possibly follow up with phone call. And we can talk about the specifics of that. The third thing is, in our division, many of our faculty meetings are followed by educational conferences for our fellows, and there are times when folks from around the hospital will come and talk about projects that they're working on where they need our assistance. And so I know that some of the divisions are open to research collaborations, but they sort of need to hear from whether it's the scientist or the radiologist or the pharmacist that wants to work with the GI clinicians to do a project, and you basically ask to be invited to come and talk about your work for 40 minutes and then say, you know, if there's someone who wants to collaborate with patients with XYZ condition, this is what I have to offer, and here's how to contact me. For divisions that maybe don't have fellows and have departmental meetings but maybe don't have educational meetings, it might be a little bit tougher to kind of get that in. But I have noticed that there's more emphasis on research now, and divisions are more interested in their members doing research, and they may just not know that there are folks on the research side here that are working in the same field or the same body system as what they see. And until you reach out to them, and again, keep kind of hitting them over the head with it, they might not know that you exist. I can't comment on any of the other institutions, but that's what I would suggest here. As far as finding out who the chief of each division is, we can talk about that offline, because I can put you in touch with some good resources through the directory, because you've got to start with the contact person and then go from there. I think you just have to keep pestering them.
Okay.
You know, and the ones that have fellows are a little bit more receptive, I think.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to tell it's a no or they're just busy.
They're busy, right? And I think that is not going to be an easy thing for you to sort out from the response. But yes, I can imagine that people are interested in and they're just busy, or they're not interested. Yeah. Any questions or comments from the group out there in cyberspace?
Any more questions for Matt?
Hi, this is Joanne. I'm actually a project manager, and I'm getting ready to start helping out research. And I was curious about when you were talking about the resources you wish you had known more about. You mentioned technical advice for laying out a project, and I was just curious if you could expand upon that a little bit. So what was available, and what did you find helpful once you knew it was available?
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. So one of the two aims of my project is on patients before and after a food challenge and measuring certain hormones in their blood over time. And I sort of conceived of the idea based on some prior work that others had done, and how I sort of designed the experiment. But I only had one or two sort of mentors to kind of talk it over with from the scientific standpoint. From the practical standpoint of securing the equipment, securing the facility, getting the nurses to do it, tips about recruiting the patients. So some of that nitty-gritty didn't come until we were well into the doing it, and I think that would have been better to have had access to in the beginning. And I got a lot of that from word of mouth or just folks putting me in touch with other folks. And there was no sort of framework for, hey, if you want to do studies involving blood samples over time or inpatients or outpatients, here's who you talk to. They do it all the time. And here's what you're going to need to budget for, and here's what you're going to need in terms of supplies. That would have been really helpful from the get-go, and it sort of unfolded as I ran into roadblocks, and folks said, you might want to try these folks. It's done. And I'm not sure I know how a particular institution would prepare that framework for investigators, but there was a lot of cobbling together and fingers crossing, and then things kind of fell into place. So that was one aspect, technically, just getting the work done. I think it's always great in the beginning to have lots of people kind of looking at your research plan and saying, this is going to work. Whether the data is what you expect it to be with your hypothesis is one thing, but this is literally going to work out versus, you're never going to have the results you even could interpret if you do this particular technique here, or if you do with this kind of stuff. That came into play with the second part of my project, which was immunohistochemistry. And I had great connections and folks from the past who helped me think about, what they could do, but I didn't, and this is partly was my fault, I didn't talk to pathology from the get-go about what they thought about tissue suitability. We had this big repository of tissue, and I just didn't ask the right questions about whether or not the tissue is going to be just as useful for what I wanted to do compared to what they do with it clinically. And learning about that sort of after the fact led to some delays and led to some restructuring of the project. But again, I should have thought about seeking that out. But I think that, maybe if folks who do research in certain divisions are aware that, they have certain techniques or certain protocols that they can do, when someone comes with an idea, that point person or point group might be able to say, these are the kind of things we can do, and these are the kind of things you need to go somewhere else to do it, or this isn't really going to work with that kind of tissue. And that, I think, is also invaluable when you're coming from the clinical side of things and you haven't been doing research, as your full-time job for a long time. And dealing with patient samples, is also sort of a novel thing for me, as opposed to dealing with cells and chemicals like I did in graduate school. So having some of that kind of advice and kind of how to get it done would have been great. And what ended up happening was we planned everything out, we budgeted things, we had invoices, we did some ordering, and we did some test runs. And the test runs didn't work. And so then we went to the folks to troubleshoot, and then we sort of had to revamp things. And it was worked out well, but it certainly gave me some pause and took some extra time and money. But, I probably could have avoided that if there were more of a go-to on how you do this here for research purposes, not so much thinking about it from how they do it for the clinical side. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the things I can think of specifically.
Okay, thank you. It's very helpful. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Is there any other questions for Matt?
Hey, this is Jeannie Ruddy in Charleston. I just had one other somewhat tangential question. I also went to Thomas Jefferson for medical school from 2001 to 2005, and I'm just curious, as when you were there, you do look a little bit familiar.
So I started there in 97 and I finished in 2004.
Oh, okay.
So I was supposed to be in the class of 2001, but with my PhD, it delayed me 3 years. So I was a third year, probably when you were a second year, it sounds like, and I was a fourth year.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. What was your name then? Gina?
Jeannie Ruddy, R-U-D-D-Y.
Okay.
But, maybe just around in the hospital or whatever. But I'm a vascular surgeon down in Charleston and also did the MRDA program recently. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate your talk, and I agree with a lot that you had to say about seeking out mentors and figuring out a way to budget your time and having dedicated time. That's something that I learned from the program as well.
That's great to hear. Do you feel like you've had good support from your division and department for getting the MRDA and whatever comes next?
I do. I have a dedicated day of research that I'm never on call that day and stuff. And as you might expect, or as you alluded to earlier, the clinical side seeping into your research time can be challenging. And so having that dedicated time has been very helpful. And they are supportive, and I'm working on trying to get a career development award from the VA. So that's where their support is headed right now. So we'll see.
That's great. That's great. Good luck to you.
Thanks. You too. Thank you for all your comments today.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Do we have any other questions for Matt? Nothing?
Okay, well, Matt, definitely thank you, because I think that was helpful. Couple things to put on everyone's radar so you guys can see in the room, but the next gin session is March 24th, and Heather Bittner-Fagan is going to speak. She is a physician at Christiana, and this is brand new. Save the date. We're going to do best practice in mentoring, which I think you came last year. We had the panel. It's going to be April 7th, so we're developing the agenda, and we're going to have folks from other CTRs come, and so it should be pretty interesting. So save the date for April 7th. Other than that, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, thank you,
Thanks, everybody, for coming.